Hey guys, it's me, the Dark Master here, and today I'm going to be doing a tier list video for Prior Extinction. Now, the last tier list video I made was probably around a month ago, so now I completely renewed it, and there's a lot more different stats. So, first of all, we'll go straight to F tier with the Hypsilophodon. Now, the Hypsilophodon, the reason why it's not where Crioceratops is, or where Trudon is because all it's relying on is speed, where it doesn't really have too much attack strength, so it could probably die to Trudon very easily. Where unlike Crioceratops, it could probably defend itself against Trudon and maybe Dilophosaurus and Ceratosaurus. But that's the only reason that it's in the bottom F tier. But next we have the Crioceratops. Now the reason I didn't put Crioceratops where Trudon was is because Trudon has Pounce, and Pounce can actually kill a lot of dinosaurs super fast. Where not Hypsilophodon, but Crioceratops, it can go fast in water, but it doesn't go fast in land, where it does have a lot of defense though, so if it gets attacked by something like Dilophosaurus, Megalosaurus, Ceratosaurus, and maybe even Utahraptor, it could survive. But it doesn't really have too much land speed. But anyways, next we're going to move on to Trudon. Now Trudon is a good F tier dinosaur. It can really do damage, especially with its pounce. Unlike Utahraptor, where Utahraptor can actually kill Rex with its pounce if you use it wisely. Where Trudon can most likely kill a Ceratosaurus or maybe Dilophosaurus with its pounce. But that's why it's really in top F tier, not in E tier, because stuff like Ceratosaurus can still sort of kill it. But anyways, next we're moving on to E tier with the Ornithomimus at the very bottom. Now the reason it's at the very bottom is because all it's relying on is speed, where once it's out of stamina, it's pretty much dead. And it is very fast to grow as well, but it's just because it's a small dinosaur. But it also dies very fast. A lot of the times it usually gets killed by a Carno or a Utahraptor. Anyways, next we have the Ceratosaurus. Now Ceratosaurus is a good dinosaur. It's not as good as Dilophosaurus though, because Dilophosaurus got a buff where it does a lot more, like a tiny bit more bleed, which can really affect Ceratosaurus. Where Ceratosaurus is basically mini Allosaurus, but it's not really as good as Allosaurus, so yeah, that's why it's in E tier and not D tier, where Megalosaurus is actually a lot better than Ceratosaurus. Anyways, next we have the Dilophosaurus. Now the Dilophosaurus got a buff last weekend, or the week before that week, but the buff made it a bit stronger, and now it could actually take more stuff on, because before it could barely take on Utahraptor, where it can, but Utahraptor could take on bigger things than its own size, so that's why Utahraptor is higher than Dilophosaurus. But anyways, next we have the Parasaurolophus. Now Parasaurolophus was in, like, real life, it was actually supposed to be very powerful, where in Prior Extinction, Parasaurolophus can pretty much get killed by everything, to be honest. It does not do too much damage, and its cooldown time is super long, where, like, if you tail ride it, you could pretty much kill anything with, like, tail riding a Parasaurolophus is legit how Parasaurolophus dies. Now, Parasaurolophus, though, it does rely on its speed and stamina, but they do eventually run out, so. Anyways, next we have the Pachycephalosaurus. Now, the reason I put it higher than Dilophosaurus and Ceratosaurus is because Pachycephalosaurus has armor and can really quickly stun and kill dinosaurs super fast, such as Ceratosaurus and Dilophosaurus, where some coasters as well do play Pachycephalosaurus just to stun them. But it could really easily get killed as well, so that's why it's in D tier. Anyways, next we have the Utahraptor. Now the Utahraptor is a very good D tier dinosaur, just because it can basically pounce on bigger stuff than itself, and it could pretty much kill stuff from S tier if you're a good player, but you're basically one bite from any stuff in S tier, so it's also quite hard to do damage to stuff, especially if you don't have enough stamina to pounce. So that's why it's in D tier. Anyways, next we have the Megalosaurus. Now the Megalosaurus is actually quite decent. It has good nighttime camouflage, but that's not all it has. It also does have its very strong bite force, as well as its very high run speed. Like, it's not as high as something like Parasaurolophus, but it's higher than Crioceratops, so that's actually quite good. But anyways, next we have the Caprosuchus, and the Caprosuchus is actually a very good dinosaur, but it cannot really take on stuff bigger than its own size if it's just one, where it could really quickly run on land and it could really quickly go in water. So that's why Caprosuchus is in D tier. Anyways, next we have C tier, and in C tier at the very bottom we have the Regaloceratops. And the Regaloceratops is pretty much a very basic type of the Triceratops. Now, it's not really too strong. It could easily get killed by something like Allo or Acro, or even Puro. And sometimes even Carno can kill it, but that's why it's in C tier, because it does not really have too much of a backwards defense, because like Parasaurolophus, you could tail ride it, but it does do a big amount of damage and a big amount of bleed, so you do sort of have to watch out sometimes if you don't have that much health. But anyways, next in C tier we have the Carnotaurus, and the Carnotaurus really stayed in C tier. Pretty sure in the last tier list it was at the top of C tier, but not anymore, because the Carnotaurus, although it's super fast and efficient and does a lot of damage, it kinda gets bodied by a lot of things, such as Suco, Acro, Allo, and even a lot of herbivores. But that doesn't really mean that it's really bad. But anyways, next we're moving on to Pachyrhinosaurus. Now the reason that Kentrosaurus is higher than Pachyrhinosaurus is because Pachyrhinosaurus, if you're not careful and people tail ride you, you could easily die, where with Kentrosaurus, you have that tail, so you don't really have to worry about tail riding. You just have to whack your opponents with your tail until they die of bleed, because Kentrosaurus has very high bleed, and that's a really good thing. But anyways, next we're moving on to B tier, where with B tier we have the Amargasaurus. Now the Amargasaurus is sort of a terrible version of the Diplodocus, just because although it does have tail whips and stuff, it does not do too much damage, and stuff like Allo, even Suco, and sometimes Carno can kill it. Now, also the reason why it's there is because the Amargasaurus is doesn't have quite enough health for a sauropod. So that's why it's in that type of tier. But anyways, next we have Suco, and Suco is basically a worse version of Spinosaurus, but Suco does have those advantages instead of Spinosaurus, where it's faster on land. Where if it's faster on land, it could easily do damage and stuff. Where with Spino, it's not as fast as land. But anyways, that's why it's in B tier. It's not quite top B tier or low A tier. Sort of like mid B tier. Anyways, next we have the Acrocanthosaurus. Now, the reason Acrocanthosaurus is lower than Allosaurus is because Allosaurus can really do damage super fast. Allosaurus has a ton of speed and a ton of bleed, where Acro cannot really turn that fast, where usually ends up with Allosaurus beating Acro most of the time. Now that's the only reason it's lower than Allosaurus, because Allosaurus has quite great stats. Now, next we have the Diplodocus, and the reason that Diplodocus is not an A tier is because even though it's like large and stuff, it's very hard to grow, and it usually gets killed by Troodons and stuff that scavenge. And a lot of people don't really like letting Diplodocuses grow, where that's why Diplodocus is in B tier, because it's very hard to grow, but once it's fully grown, it absolutely is one of the strongest dinosaurs in the game. But it can easily get killed by stuff like Tyrannosaurus and Giga. But anyways, next we have the Allosaurus. Now, the Allosaurus is actually one of the best dinosaurs in prior extinction. It's not S tier type of dinosaur, but it's definitely low A tier. The reason I say that is because Allosaurus can absolutely bleed out its opponents, where it's not too good at opponents like Stegosaurus, where you can't tail ride it, you have to like go forwards to kill it. But if you're able to get your Stegosaurus out of stamina, you could easily kill it instantly. But that's the only reason it's in A tier, because it really does damage very fast. Unlike something like Giga, where although Giga does bleed and stuff, it's not too fast, and it does not have a good turning speed, so it's really hard to get to Anki or Trike. But anyways, next we have the Sinoceratops. Now the Sinoceratops is quite good. It does a good amount of bleed, a good amount of damage, and it also has a great speed. Now, it's not as good as Stegosaurus, who has that giant freaking tail that smacks stuff and does a ton of bleed as well. But it's definitely a dinosaur that's worth putting in low A tier. But anyways, next in A tier, we have the Stegosaurus. Now, the Stegosaurus is actually quite good, because its tail can do absolute good damage. But the reason it's not higher than Puro is because sometimes when Stegosaurus is drinking, you really have the tail whip only for Stegosaurus, where Purosaurus can easily just come out and when you're drinking and just kill you, where before you switch to your tail. But that's the only reason it's lower than Puro. But next we have the Purosaurus. Now the Purosaurus is actually pretty good. It legit can kill anything in the water except for Spinosaurus. Just because Purosaurus does a lot of damage, it doesn't mean though that it's the best thing ever. It usually gets countered when it's on land by stuff like Allosaurus, Acrocantho, and even Carnotaurus sometimes, because to be honest, Purosaurus does not have the best turning speed on land. But anyways, next in A tier, we have the Dinochirus. Now the Dinochirus is a great A tier dinosaur. It has a lot of health, it's okay on speed, and it does a lot of damage. It could probably fight T-Rex and sometimes win. But that's the only reason it's an A tier and not S tier, is because bleed can really affect this dinosaur a lot. And also, it could easily get surprise attacked from something like Spinosaurus from the water, or Puro, where unlike Edmontosaurus, Edmontosaurus actually has that stun that is sort of broken, and it could legit stun stuff like Acro, which is legit almost twice its size. But Edmontosaurus does have a good amount of weight. It almost weighs as much as Acro and Suco. Well, it probably weighs a tiny bit more, but that shouldn't mean that it should stun those two dinosaurs, which is the main reason Suco usually dies to Edmonto. Same as Acro, where Allosaurus usually does not fight Edmonto, because Edmontosaurus does not have the speed to chase down Allosaurus. And anyways, guys, next we're moving on to the best tiers, the S tier dinosaurs. Now, in low tier, S tier, we have the Therizinosaurus, and the only reason it's lower than something like Giga is because it does not have the best health, but it can legit tear through health very fast. To be honest, it could probably kill a T-Rex if T-Rex isn't lucky. But anyways, next we're moving on to Sauroposeidon, and the reason Sauroposeidon is an S tier, not A or B tier, is because although it's super hard to grow and it takes super long time, and you easily get killed as a baby, when it's fully grown, you cannot be killed by anything. If it's by itself, you can pretty much only be killed if there's more than one dinosaur. But that's the only reason it's in S tier and not A or B tier. But anyways, next we're moving on to Giga. Now Giga is a very great S tier dinosaur with a high amount of bleed, which is why it counters Dinochirus and Edmontosaurus, because bleed can absolutely demolish health very fast. But anyways, that's why Giga is in mid A tier, because it does not have the best amount of damage. Unlike Anki or T-Rex, Giga does not do as much damage as them. But anyways, so we're moving on to Anki now. Now Anki is a very good mid-tier S-tier dinosaur. It can absolutely break through any type of armor, and also does stun for one of its attacks. Now Anki also does do a big amount of damage with its tail, where if you're attacking from the front and you keep attacking from the front, you could basically kill Anki, but that's very hard to do. So that's why it's in mid-tier S-tier, because Anki can still get killed by stuff like Rex. But anyways, next we're moving on to T-Rex, and the only reason T-Rex is lower than Spino is because Spinosaurus can absolutely just swim. And swimming is probably one of the best advantages Spinosaurus has against T-Rex. So that's why T-Rex is below Spinosaurus, but T-Rex does a crazy amount of damage. It does 200 something damage. And that's enough to 2-shot Allo, 3-shot Acro, and it's absolutely crazy. Which is why it could kill Therizinosaurus easily as well, because although Therizinosaurus does like 51 damage, and it does like 200 damage per second, where T-Rex can just keep biting you and you're dead. But anyways, next we're moving on to Spino, and Spino is an absolutely great carnivore for S tier. It has very good advantages. It could swim. It could as well do a ton of damage to stuff. It can pretty much counter most herbivores as well. But the only bad thing is that once you're out of the water, and you could basically water camp with Spino too, but once you're out of the water, you're basically more vulnerable to dinosaurs, where the closer to water you are, the more damage you could basically do per second. Where you could just camp the water, and that's how Spinosaurus and Suco really work. They really should be water camping, where Puro mostly does that because people who play Puro, I guess, like to water camp. But still, it doesn't mean that Spinosaurus and Suchomimus can't water camp for food. But anyways, next we have the top S tier dinosaur, which is Trike again. Now the reason Trike is the best S tier dinosaur is because Triceratops can absolutely destroy anything with it, because it does like 300 damage with its horns per hit, and that could absolutely kill T-Rex in 3 hits. Where T-Rex will have to 4-hit it. So it's a pretty fair match against T-Rex versus Trike, and same Spinosaurus versus Trike. But that's the only reason Trike is top S tier, because nothing really wants to mess with Trike. But anyways guys, that's going to be the end of the video for today. Hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.